The lights in room 6 flickered once, then went out completely. That wouldn't have bothered me much if it hadn't been for the fact that no one was supposed to be staying there. The room had been empty for 3 nights ever since the last storm knocked out power in half the lodge. We'd turned off the water, stripped the beds, unplugged everything. But from the lobby desk, I saw movement behind the curtains, a figure slow and deliberate pacing once, then stopping completely still like it knew I was watching. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever worked a night shift that didn't feel quite right. And if these stories help pass the time, I'd be glad to share more. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 at the time, working the front desk at a mountain lodge up near Echo Pass in Colorado. Back then, it was mostly seasonal traffic skiers. In the winter, hikers and older couples. In the summer, the occasional family looking for a quiet getaway. I'd moved up there after a bad breakup, planning to stay for 6 months. Ended up staying 8 years. There was something peaceful about the place when it wasn't full of tourists, especially in the off-season when the snow muffled everything and the lodge felt like it was floating in the trees. That January had been particularly brutal. Blizzards rolled in back to back, cutting off power, blocking the main highway, and keeping us nearly empty for weeks. Management told us to keep operating with a skeleton crew, just me, at the desk, Len Turner handling maintenance, and a local couple from town who did cleaning during the day. We only kept 4 rooms open, all on the north side, where the generator could still reach. Everything else was locked and shut down. Room 6 wasn't one of the rooms we kept open. It started on a Wednesday night just after 10. The snow had been coming down hard since early afternoon, and the wind made the old windows rattle like someone was testing them from the outside. I'd made myself a cup of coffee in the little break nook behind the desk and was flipping through one of those tourist guides we always left out for guests. Things to do, trails to hike, cafes that wouldn't reopen until spring. I was alone in the lobby. Len had gone out earlier to check the salt levels in the parking lot bins. Said he'd be back by midnight. That's when I saw the flicker. Room 6 sat directly across the inner courtyard, second floor, just above the lounge. The window had heavy curtains, brown and faded, but they were thin enough that when the lights were on, you could see the outline of anyone moving inside. It was faint, just a shifting shadow at first, like someone pacing from one end to the other. Then it paused, held perfectly still for maybe 20 seconds, then gone. I stared at the window for a good minute before even getting up. I told myself it was probably just a trick of the wind, maybe a branch caught in the eaves. But I knew better. There were no trees close enough to cast a shadow like that. I walked to the control panel to double-check the room list. Only rooms 2, 3, 7, and 8 were occupied. Room 6 had been offline for weeks. Water shut off. Power switch flipped at the circuit box. I checked the board just in case the peg for room 6's key hadn't moved. Still, I grabbed the master. The snow outside had already started drifting against the edges of the walkways. My boots crunched in the packed powder as I crossed the courtyard and climbed the creaky stairs. I paused halfway up, listening. There was no sound, not footsteps, not voices, nothing but the low hum of wind pressing against the siding. The hallway was dark, and even though I'd walked it 1,000 times, it felt off that night. Not dangerous exactly, just vacant in a way that didn't make sense, like the air was heavier. When I reached room 6, I hesitated. There wasn't any light coming from under the door, no sound. I knocked twice, lightly, more out of habit than anything. No answer. I slipped the key into the lock and turned. The room was dark, but not cold, which was wrong. The heat should have been off. I reached for the light switch, but the bulb overhead stayed dead. The hallway light behind me cast just enough glow for me to see the room had been made up. Not just clean, but prepped blankets, turned down pillows, fluffed fresh towels on the rack. And someone had been there recently. The armchair by the window had a folded jacket draped over it. A mug, one of ours, sat on the side table, still steaming faintly. The bed had a slight impression in the shape of a body. I took a step inside, and that's when I saw the boots. A pair of heavy-soled winter boots caked with partially melted snow, tucked neatly under the desk. The kind of boots we sold in the gift shop 2 years back, before corporate pulled half our inventory. No one should have had access to those. I backed out slowly, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit, locked the door behind me, and made a beeline for the office where we kept the guest logs. The most recent entries matched what I expected no one new checked in since the previous afternoon. No cash transactions, no missing keys. I picked up the radio and called Len. He didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the office until dawn, jumping at every creak and gust of wind. Len didn't show back up until almost 7. Said he'd hit a patch of ice and slid into a snowbank halfway down the service road. Had to dig himself out. I told him about the room. He didn't laugh, which I appreciated, just nodded and grabbed his tool belt. We went up together. I had the master key. When we opened the door, everything was exactly how I'd found it the night before, except for one thing. The boots were gone. No water on the floor, no coffee cup, no jacket. The bed looked smooth, untouched. The towels were gone too. Not missing, just properly restocked, as if housekeeping had done their usual morning routine. Only they hadn't. The cleaning crew hadn't come in that day. They'd called out that morning because of the roads. We locked the door again, pulled the circuit to room 6, and left the key with the manager's box. Len said he'd sleep better if we pretended the whole thing never happened. I tried, but I kept thinking about that faint steam rising from the mug, how the window was just slightly cracked open enough to let cold air curl inside, and how that shadow behind the curtain never moved quite like a person should. More like it waited. Let me know if you've ever worked in a place that felt empty in the wrong way. And if you're still with me, I've got more to share. Things people have seen when they thought they were alone, and what waited just behind the walls. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories that sits in your gut like a bad meal, quiet but heavy. I've worked graveyard shift long enough to know how your mind can mess with you in the early morning hours when the sky turns that weird blue, and even machines start to sound unsure of themselves. But this wasn't one of those nights. Something about it was wrong from the beginning. Back in 2019, I was running third shift at a distribution warehouse just outside Allentown. We handled small freight for regional stores, home goods, seasonal inventory, stuff like that. I'd been with the company about 6 years by then. Wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and I liked being in charge of the floor when it was quiet. Nights tend to attract a certain kind of worker, people who don't fit the daytime rhythm, people who prefer silence. I never minded that. I wasn't much for small talk anyway. We ran with a lean crew, usually 6 or 7 of us, regulars. Guys who showed up on time, did their jobs, and didn't ask many questions. Every now and then, we'd get a new hire thrown in from corporate, someone doing their 90-day trial, seeing if they could hack it on the floor. Most didn't last. Wesley was one of those. He came in on a Tuesday night, mid-October. Air was just starting to turn, that dry, early chill that makes the concrete feel colder than it is. Wesley was maybe late 20s, slim, build, quiet. Too quiet even for night shift. Said he just moved to the area from Michigan. Never explained why. I didn't pry. He wore this tan canvas jacket with frayed cuffs and an old Union patch stitched into the shoulder, not one of ours, and probably not from anything recent. I remember thinking it looked like something you'd find in a thrift store, but it fit him like it had always been his. He had these pale gray eyes that never really landed when you talked to him, always a little off-center. The kind of guy you forget is in the room until he says something that makes everyone stop. First 2 nights were uneventful. He kept to himself, worked fast, didn't complain. Took every order I gave him without pushback. That Thursday, though, his 3rd shift, was when I started noticing the little things. It was close to 300 a.m. when I went up to the break room for a stale cup of coffee. Place was dead quiet, fluorescents buzzing like they always did. I passed Wesley in aisle 4 rearranging some seasonal bins. He nodded once, eyes flicking past me like he was watching something move behind me. I turned to look, nothing there. Just rows of shrink-wrapped pallets and the humming conveyor belt that hadn't run in 2 hours. When I came back down 10 minutes later, Wesley was gone. No big deal. Guys wander. Maybe he was checking something, maybe the bathroom. But when I checked the log system at the front desk, there was no restroom code logged. We had a badge scanner there, not perfect, but enough to track movement. His card hadn't swiped anywhere since 2:42. I waited, assuming he'd turn back up. But by 3:30, I started getting uneasy. Not because I thought anything bad had happened, not yet, but because the warehouse felt off. The air in aisle 4 was colder than the rest of the building, noticeably colder, like a walk-in cooler that hadn't fully shut. And the motion light back there kept flickering on and off in a steady rhythm. On. Pause. Off. Wait 10 seconds. On again. That only happened when someone walked through it, but no one did. I called out for him. No answer. I did a sweep of the place, from the storage cages in back to the break room upstairs. Checked the time clock. No punch-out. Checked the loading bay. Locked from the inside like it should be. Even checked the lot out front. His car was still there. A dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates and a dent in the back bumper. I stood next to it for a minute, hands in my jacket pockets, staring at my own breath curling in the air. That's when I decided to call the police, just to be safe. The responding officer was a guy named Brewster. Older, probably my age, soft-spoken, but sharp. He didn't roll his eyes or brush me off, which I appreciated. He took a quick look at the building, did his own walkthrough, asked if Wesley had any medical issues or history of walking off the job. I told him I barely knew the guy. Just 3 shifts, no complaints. Then Brewster asked to see the security feed. We had 6 cameras, 2 outside, 4 inside. Only the main floor cams record audio. The one pointing down aisle 4. The last place I'd seen Wesley had grainy footage, but it showed enough. At 2:43 a.m., he's seen adjusting a stack of plastic totes. He pauses, turns, like he hears something behind him. Then he walks toward the far end of the aisle where the motion sensor light is mounted. As he moves out of frame, the light flicks off behind him. Then on again, then off. He never comes back into frame. We watch the rest of the footage. Nothing. No sign of him exiting. No trip through the back. His badge never swiped again. And yet there was no sign he'd left the building either. That morning, Brewster filed a missing persons report. They did a proper search the next day, dogs, heat sensors, the works. Nothing turned up. No traces. Not even a footprint near the side exits. And the snow had started just after dawn. His car sat in the lot for 2 more days before someone came and had it towed. Not family, just a local impound crew. The plates turned out to be fake. VIN number didn't match registration. His application to the warehouse had a valid name and phone number, but the background check never came back. It was like he appeared 3 days earlier and then vanished without a ripple. 2 weeks later, we got a new guy from corporate. Different name, different look. Everything normal. But that first night he asked me something that made my blood run cold. Said he kept seeing someone down aisle 4. Thought it was a supervisor at first, but the guy never spoke. Just stood near the back end of the aisle partially in the dark. Always in a tan canvas jacket. I told him it was just the shadows. Old buildings do that sometimes. He didn't last long either. Quit after 4 shifts. I still work the same job. Still walk that floor every night, though. I keep the lights on longer than I used to. Motion sensors don't explain everything. And every now and then, I'll get that same cold patch when I pass through aisle 4. Cold like standing next to a walk-in that never quite shuts. When it happens, I don't stop walking. I just keep my eyes forward and try not to look at the far end of the row. Because sometimes I think I see someone there. Just standing, not moving. Wearing a tan jacket that fits too well. Back in 2016, I was living in a student apartment complex just off campus. One of those bare-bones buildings that smelled like carpet glue and off-brand air freshener. I picked it because it was cheap, and I didn't mind the 15-minute walk to class. I was in my 2nd year of undergrad studying computer science, and most nights I just stayed in working on assignments or watching random YouTube tutorials until my eyes hurt. It wasn't the kind of place where people bothered each other. You nodded in the hallways, maybe held the door open if someone was carrying groceries, but that was about the extent of social interaction. The apartment across the hall from mine was 1A. It had no name on the mailbox and no decoration on the door, just a worn brass number slightly tilted and a peephole that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I never saw anyone go in or out. I assumed it was vacant. That changed one night in early October. It was just after midnight, and I'd been up late debugging a piece of code that wouldn't compile. I remember because I had my headphones on, and I'd paused the music to think through a problem line by line. That's when I heard the knock. Not at my door at 1A. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I waited, thinking maybe someone had the wrong unit, but the hallway stayed quiet. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Same rhythm. 3 knocks. No response. I got up and looked through my peephole, careful not to let my door creak too much. There was a man standing outside 1A, maybe mid-30s, wearing a long gray coat and dark jeans. He wasn't carrying anything, just standing with his hands in his pockets, staring at the door. After a few more seconds, he leaned in like he was listening for something. Then he turned and walked back down the hall. Didn't knock anywhere else, didn't look around, just left. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured maybe he was a delivery guy or a friend who had the wrong address. But then it happened again. The next night. Around the same time. Different person. A woman this time, maybe early 20s. She had a backpack and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Same routine. 3 knocks, no answer, then gone. Over the next week, it became a pattern. Not every night, but often enough that I started making note of it. Always late. Always one visitor at a time. No one ever knocked more than once, and none of them stayed longer than a minute. I never heard voices, no footsteps inside, no sounds of a door opening. Just these quiet, brief visits to a door that never responded. I eventually mentioned it to the leasing office just to see if someone actually lived there. The manager looked it up and said the lease was current but under a corporate name, something generic like Stonewell Properties. He shrugged and said some of the units were subleased to professionals who traveled a lot. That didn't sit right with me. I'd lived across the hall for almost 6 months and had never once heard movement in 1A. No footsteps, no water running, no TV, just silence. Then one night it changed. It was a Thursday, windy, colder than usual. Around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed, not quite asleep, when I heard the knock again. I almost ignored it, figuring it was another strange visit. But then there was a second knock, then a third. All faster, not frantic, just impatient. I got up and went to the door, looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I opened it a crack just enough to look into the hall. The door to 1A was wide open. Not swung open, not forced, just open like someone had stepped out to grab the paper. The lights inside were off, but I could see part of the entryway, wood floors, a wall mirror, and a row of shoes neatly placed beside the mat. No sound came from inside, no light at all. I stood there a moment longer, then closed my door and locked it. The next morning, 1A's door was shut again. Nothing looked out of place. No note, no visitors that night, just an empty hallway. I finally decided to ask around, talk to the girl who lived downstairs, a grad student named Mia. She said she'd never seen anyone go in or out of 1A either, but sometimes late at night, she'd hear a voice through the air vent, faint and low, like someone talking to themselves. Said it happened once every few weeks, usually just before sunrise. Always the same tone. Calm, measured, like someone repeating lines from memory. That was the same week I started getting wrong number calls. Not spam, just these short, empty voicemails. Always a few seconds of silence, maybe some static, and then nothing. The caller ID always showed blocked, never a number. And they always came in between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m. I kept a journal for a few weeks, logged every visitor, every knock, every call. My notes got messy after a while, times circled question marks next to repeated names. One night I swore I saw the same man from 2 weeks earlier standing at the door. Again, only this time he looked older. Same coat, same posture, but his hair was thinner, grayer. Then he turned toward me. Just a glance. Nothing dramatic, but it felt wrong. Like he wasn't surprised I was watching. Like he had expected it. I stopped writing things down after that. Eventually, I called the police, just to have something on record. A detective came by to follow up. Older guy named Lyman. He asked a few standard questions, took a look at the hallway, jotted down notes. Then he knocked on 1A. 3 times. Nothing. He turned to me and said, "You sure this wasn't just a prank or student hazing?" I told him I didn't think so. Said I'd never seen more than one visitor at a time. That the door had been open once. That I'd seen the same face more than once. He nodded, thanked me for my time, and said he'd file a report with the building manager. The next night there was a knock at my door. Not 1A. Mine. I froze. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stared at the door from across the living room. The knock didn't come again. When I finally got the nerve to look through the peephole, no one was there. But taped to the center of the door was a plain white envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Nothing typed. Just a sentence handwritten in blocky print. "You've been noticed. I moved out 2 weeks later." When I turned in my keys, I asked the clerk at the front desk if anyone had taken over 1A. She looked confused, said there was no Unit 1A, that the building started at 1B. I didn't argue. These days I live in a townhouse across town. No shared walls, no long hallways, no mystery doors. But sometimes late at night I'll get a voicemail with no message. Just a few seconds of silence. And then the line goes dead. The last summer I ever rode my bike after dark started out like any other. Long days, sticky evenings, and that quiet stretch between dinner time and bedtime where the whole neighborhood felt paused. I was 16, still coasting on that weird in-between space where your parents stop watching your every move, but you're not old enough to realize some places aren't as safe as they seem. That was the year I noticed how many houses on our block didn't turn their porch lights on anymore. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Denver. Clean sidewalks, 2-car garages, front yards, that all looked about the same after a while. My dad worked nights at the hospital, so it was usually just me and my mom after dark. She liked to keep the windows open until bedtime. Said the breeze helped her sleep. I usually took my bike around the loop a few times before curfew, just enough to burn off the last of my restlessness. That August, something started bothering me during those rides. Nothing huge, just little changes, like a street lamp that flickered every time I passed it, or the way the same stretch of sidewalk felt a little too quiet even with the windows open and TVs glowing inside. I'd pass house after house with no movement, no sound, not even a dog barking. But the part that stuck with me, the part I still think about, was the van. It was an old blue panel van, no windows on the sides, just 2 in the back. Looked like something from the 80s, the kind of vehicle people bought when kids still played outside all day. I first noticed it parked across from the Simmons house. That was 3 houses down from us, right where the road curved. I thought maybe it belonged to one of the contractors working on the roof there. But the van didn't move for 3 days. Same spot. No one got in or out, at least not while I was around. Then it disappeared for a night. I figured that was the end of it, but the next evening it was back. Same spot. Only now it was facing the other direction. I mentioned it to my mom. She looked up from the sink and said maybe it was just someone visiting. She didn't seem concerned. Neither did anyone else. No one talked about it. Not at the store, not at school, not even the neighbors who usually knew when someone sneezed 3 doors down. Still, I started cutting my rides short. Something about that van made the back of my neck feel cold, even when the air was warm. One night I rode past and could have sworn I saw a figure in the driver's seat not moving, just sitting there in the dark. I didn't stop. Just kept pedaling, heart thudding like I'd run a sprint. A few nights later, my dad picked up an extra shift and my mom went to bed early. I was up late, watching TV in the living room. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on the front door. Not loud, just 2 quick taps. We didn't have a doorbell, and no one used the front door that late. I turned the volume down and sat there for a second, thinking maybe it was the wind. Then the knock came again. 2 taps, no voice, no footsteps on the porch. I stood up and edged toward the window. We had those heavy curtains that never quite closed all the way. I peeked out through the gap, no one on the porch, but the van was there, not across the street this time. It was in our driveway. I remember freezing in place. Every instinct in me said not to move. I backed away from the window and turned off the TV. The room felt too quiet, like the kind of quiet you get right before a thunderstorm hits. I went to wake my mom, but when I reached the hallway, I saw her bedroom door was already open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring toward the hallway, like she'd already heard the knock. She asked if I saw anyone. I told her no, but that the van was back and closer. She got up without saying anything else and picked up the phone to call the police. Her hand was shaking, I remember that. Not dramatic, just enough that I noticed. The police showed up maybe 15 minutes later. The van was gone by then. Sergeant Williams was the one who knocked. He was calm, respectful. Took my statement while another officer did a slow drive around the block. I told him what I saw about the knock, the van, the nights before. He didn't act surprised. Said they'd been getting scattered reports like that all summer. Unmarked vans, late knocks, no follow-up. Always in quiet neighborhoods. I asked if they ever caught anyone. He said, not yet. Most of the plates were temporary tags or stolen. He told me to keep my blinds shut after dark and not to answer the door unless I recognized the voice. Before he left, I asked what they thought the point of the knocks was. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me for a second like he wasn't sure how much to say. Then he said, "Sometimes they're just checking who answers." That line stuck with me. I didn't sleep much the next few nights. I stopped riding after sunset, stopped using the front room after dark. We kept the porch light on every night, even when we weren't home. My mom started closing the windows by 7 husiras, and my dad put motion lights near the driveway. The van didn't come back, at least not to our house. But the weird thing is, a few weeks later, I was walking home from school, cutting through the parking lot, behind the strip mall near our neighborhood. That's when I saw it again. Same van, same dent in the rear door, parked at the edge of the lot facing the road. No one was inside. But when I got closer, I saw something taped to the inside of the driver's side window. Just a strip of masking tape with something handwritten on it. It said, "Too late here." I walked the rest of the way home without looking back. I didn't tell my parents, not then. Sometimes I think whoever was in that van already knew our routine. Knew the street lights, knew which houses had open windows and which kids rode bikes too late. And sometimes, even now, when I see a van idling near the curb, I still check for tape on the window. Just in case they're still checking who answers. I used to travel alone all the time. I liked the quiet, the distance, the way unfamiliar towns made me feel like I could disappear for a while without anyone noticing. But there was something about that last trip, the one I took in early spring, before tourist season hit, that made me rethink all of it. It started with a strange old key, and it ended with me sleeping with a chair against the door for the rest of the week. In March of 2022, I rented a little Airbnb cottage down near Edisto Island. I just wrapped up a big contract and wanted somewhere calm to reset. The listing was called the Blue Heron Retreat. It looked rustic, but well-kept whitewashed porch, pale green shutters, hammock out back. The photos made it seem like the kind of place where you could hear birds before sunrise and walk barefoot through the grass without worry. The host, Miss Ruth, was in her 70s, maybe older. She met me on the porch with a tin of homemade cookies and a kind of cautious warmth that made it clear she didn't normally rent to strangers, especially not this early in the season. She said most folks didn't book until late May. The cottage was simple inside wood paneling, lace curtains, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon oil. There was a printed welcome sheet on the counter, Wi-Fi password emergency numbers, and a note that read, "Back door lock can stick, give it a firm twist." That detail stayed in the back of my mind. She gave me 2 keys, one brass for the front one, silver for the back. They were attached to a plastic tag that had the cottage name written in blocky marker. But what caught my attention was the 3rd key, a small black one like something for a locker or padlock. I asked what it was for. Miss Ruth paused for a second and said, "That one's old. Meant to take it off. Just ignore it." I smiled politely, but I kept it on the ring. Habit, I guess. The first night passed uneventfully. I made tea, answered a few emails, and watched the light fade through the kitchen blinds. Around 11:00, I heard the unmistakable sound of a screen door somewhere nearby, creaking open, then slowly closing again. I froze, listening. Then nothing. Just the soft pulse of ocean wind through the palms. I assumed it was the neighbor's house. There were 2 other cottages nearby, though both looked empty. No cars in the driveways, no porch lights. Still, I double-checked the locks and slid a chair beneath the back doorknob just in case. The next day, I took a long walk down to the gas station by the main road. It was about a mile out. The clerk there was maybe my age, bored and friendly. We chatted a bit while I waited for my change. When I told him which cottage I was staying in, he blinked for a second like I'd said something strange, then shrugged it off. "You get the one with the blue porch?" he asked. I nodded. "They don't usually rent that one anymore," he said, then added, "Not since the thing with the guy." When I asked what he meant, he just smiled, like he'd said too much, handed me my receipt, and wished me a quiet stay. That night, I couldn't settle. I kept thinking about the screen door, about that 3rd key. I picked it up and studied it again. Just a plain black key, slightly worn. Nothing etched or labeled. I tried it on the front, and back doors didn't fit either. Later, when I opened the closet in the main bedroom, I noticed something odd. Behind the hanging bathrobes, there was a narrow seam in the paneling, almost like a second door or a boarded-up shelf. I pressed on it gently, and it gave just slightly, not enough to open, but just enough to feel hollow behind it. That night I dreamed someone was walking up and down the back steps. Never knocking, just walking. On the third night I woke around 2:40 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. Not rushed, just steady, measured. I stayed still, holding my breath, trying to decide if it was real or part of whatever dream I'd just left. Then I heard the back door handle jiggle. Once, then again, harder. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and crept to the hallway. The kitchen was dark, except for the glow of the microwave clock. I stared at the back door. The old glass panes in the upper half reflected just enough to show that no one was directly in front of it now. Then the knob turned a third time, slow and deliberate. I whispered, "I've called the cops, even though I hadn't." The handle stopped moving. I waited another full minute before peeking out through the front curtain. No car, no lights, no one. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning I packed my things, but I didn't leave. Something in me wanted to finish the stay, like walking away would mean whatever happened had won somehow. Around noon, I asked Miss Ruth about the key again. This time I was more direct. She looked uncomfortable, said it used to go to a shed out back that wasn't there anymore. Then she said something I'll never forget, that key never left the ring. Not even when the last girl took it with her. I asked what she meant by last girl, but she just shook her head and said it was all a misunderstanding. Claimed the girl had left early without warning, and someone else found her bags still in the closet 2 days later. On my final night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with the panel in the closet. I took the small black key, pressed the seam, and tried to wedge the key into a thin, vertical crack along the edge. I didn't expect anything to happen, but it clicked. The panel didn't swing open. It just shifted back half an inch, revealing a sliver of darkness behind it. I didn't open it further. I just stood there, staring at that slice of black. Then I heard something from inside. The quiet sound of a breath being held, not exhaled, not inhaled, just held. I pushed the panel back shut, locked the bedroom door, and dragged the dresser in front of it. That was the only time in my life I truly believed someone was standing inches away from me, separated only by wood and a decision. The next morning I left the key ring on the porch railing and walked the mile to the gas station. I didn't leave a review, didn't answer Miss Ruth's voicemail. I just got home, unpacked, and put a solid deadbolt on my own bedroom door. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I'll replay the sound that came from behind that panel, the sound of someone trying not to be discovered. And I wonder if that third key ever truly belonged to me, or if it was meant for someone already inside. I don't usually talk about this. I've told Charlie a version of it, and I think Denny remembers more than he says, but we all agreed. Back then it was better not to dig too deep. It was the kind of thing you laugh off once, maybe twice, and then you stop mentioning it altogether, not because it wasn't real, but because it felt like the wrong kind of real. The kind that stays near when you speak it out loud. Back in the summer of 2007, I was finishing high school in a small town near Wichita. I'd just turned 18, working weekends at a hardware store, and spending most of my time waiting for something interesting to happen. That August, the traveling carnival rolled into the county fairgrounds, like it always did, a mix of fried smells, blinking rides, and tired-looking workers pretending to smile. Charlie, Denny, and I had gone every year since middle school. This was supposed to be our last one before everyone left for college or wherever life was pulling them. A farewell night. It was sticky hot that evening, the kind of Kansas humidity that turns your shirt into a wet rag by sundown. We got there a little after dark when the lights on the rides had taken over and the sky was a low purple haze. The crowds weren't thick, but they never are on a Thursday. We played at casual funnel cake ring toss, a few cheap thrills, but there was a weirdness hanging over everything. Not dramatic, just slightly off, like the music was out of tune or the air had a hum to it you couldn't place. I remember thinking the people working the booths looked thinner than usual. Not skinnier exactly, more stretched out, tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Around 10 o'clock, we stopped near the photo booth tucked between the old shooting gallery and the cotton candy trailer. I hadn't planned on using it, but Ava was working inside that year, a girl we all knew in passing. She was older than us by 2 or 3 years, barely said a word back in school, but there was something magnetic about her in that dim, pink light behind the booth curtain. She waved us in with a crooked smile, said the session was on the house. It was a tight fit for 3 guys, but we crammed into the photo booth and let the machine click through 4 exposures. Between flashes, something strange happened with the light. I remember the last photo looking darker than it should have been, like the bulb misfired or the power dipped. We laughed it off, stepped out into the midway, and waited for the photo strip to drop from the slot. But it didn't. Nothing came out. We waited another minute, and Ava poked her head around the curtain, looking more confused than apologetic. She said the machine had jammed, that it sometimes did that when the power fluctuated. She slid the curtain shut again and said she'd see if she could print it manually. That's when things started to shift. We wandered off, figured we'd circle back in a bit. But when we returned, maybe 20 minutes later, the photo booth was dark. Ava was gone. No lights inside, no movement behind the curtain. We asked the guy running the candy trailer next door if he'd seen her, and he just blinked like he didn't know who we were talking about. Said no one had been in that booth all night, that it hadn't been operational this season. We argued with him we'd just seen her, just took the pictures. He shrugged, wiped his hands on his apron and walked off like it wasn't his problem. Charlie pulled the curtain open himself. Inside the bench was still warm, but the machine wasn't on, and there were no photos printed or jammed. Nothing at all, just that faint smell of burnt plastic and a coil of paper ribbon curled behind the coin slot. We left after that, didn't even bother with one last ride. I remember walking back to the car in near silence, our sneakers scuffing the gravel in unison, like a funeral march. When we got in, Denny said something like, "Maybe it didn't happen," and Charlie told him to shut up. Back at home, I didn't sleep. I lay there until maybe 2:30, then went out to the garage to grab a soda from the fridge. That's when I saw the photo strip sitting on the passenger seat of my car. Still damp from developing, the paper curled slightly at the edges. I didn't remember bringing it home. None of us had it. I hadn't left my car unlocked. But there it was. 4 black and white photos, just like we'd posed for. First 3 looked normal, us goofing around, crowding in, laughing. But the fourth one had changed. Charlie's face was clear. Denny, too. But where I should have been, there was a blur. Not the kind from movement, but like something had been dragged across the image after it developed. My face looked stretched, pulled left to right, like static in an old VHS tape. Behind us, the photo booth curtain was half open, and someone was standing there. Not Ava. Taller. No face you could make out. Just the outline of a person in the corner where there shouldn't have been any space at all. I showed the photo to Charlie the next day. He stared at it for a while and then said something that still sticks with me. He said, "I think it was always like that. I just didn't notice until now." We never figured out where Ava went. No one at school had seen her since junior year, and I still don't know if she was really there that night or if we'd mistaken someone else in the dark. I kept the photo for years tucked inside a copy of my old driver's manual in a locked drawer. One night, I think it was 2014, I took it out to look again like I sometimes did. Only this time the fourth frame was blank. Just two guys in a booth, empty space where I'd been. I haven't seen Charlie in a long time. Denny moved to Arizona. Every once in a while, I think about tracking them down and asking if they remember it all the same way. But I never do. Something about that night feels like it kept developing, like the story isn't done yet, just waiting for the next exposure. I was driving north through California for a work conference when I wound up in Sonora for the night. It wasn't planned. Just one of those situations where the sun goes down, your eyes start to ache, and you see a vacancy sign glowing red through the trees. I remember the motel being one of those older two-story setups with outside stairwells and faded wooden trim, the kind that still hands you a real key instead of a card. The sign out front just said, "Vista Pines," though there were no pines in sight, just a gravel lot and a stretch of highway lined with roadside weeds. The man at the front desk was named Tony, or at least that's what his tag said. He was middle-aged, polite in a way that felt like habit rather than kindness. The lobby had a plastic plant, a rack of old tourist brochures, and a window behind the desk that faced the back of the building, though the blinds were drawn shut. I was given room 212, top floor, last door on the left, and told checkout was 10 a.m. sharp. Tony handed me the key with 2 fingers and didn't say anything else. The room was what I expected, dated furniture, a humming mini fridge, and that particular motel smell that clings to carpet and air vents. It was almost dark when I got settled in. I cracked open the window for some air and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the quiet roll in. I could hear someone walking in the room next to mine. Room 209, heavy pacing back and forth with an occasional thump like furniture being dragged. I figured someone was just moving around, maybe irritated or restless from travel. But the sound went on for over an hour without stopping. Not footsteps, really. More like someone shifting weight back and forth over and over from heel to toe, as if stuck deciding whether to leave or stay. Eventually, I turned on the TV and let it play quietly while I got ready for bed. At some point after midnight, I woke up needing water. The room was completely silent now, no pacing, no television, not even the occasional hum from the hallway ice machine. I stepped into the bathroom and turned on the tap. As I stood there sipping from the plastic cup, I heard something not next door this time, but behind the wall opposite the mirror. It was a rhythmic knocking, low and hollow like someone tapping a pipe. It came 4 times, then stopped. After maybe 10 seconds, it started again, 4 knocks, then silence. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to figure out what was on the other side. There wasn't another room in that direction. The motel curved around a small courtyard, and room 212 was on the end. The wall should have backed up to empty space. I turned off the faucet, stood still, and waited. Nothing. But the feeling didn't leave, that static, crawling kind of alertness. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept imagining footsteps coming up the stairwell and stopping just outside my door. The next morning, I returned the key and mentioned the noise from room 209 to Tony just in passing. He looked up sharply when I said the number. Then his eyes dropped again, and he told me no one was staying in that room. I laughed a little, assuming he meant it had been vacant before someone checked in overnight. But he clarified, room 209 had been sealed off since a water leak last fall. He said it was empty. No bed, no carpet. The door had even been painted shut during renovations. He was visibly uncomfortable talking about it, like he wished I hadn't brought it up. I asked if he could show me, thinking maybe someone had broken in or used the room anyway. Tony hesitated, then nodded once. We walked outside into the bright morning sun, the air dry and cool. As we climbed the stairs, I could feel something tighten in my chest. When we reached the door to 209, he didn't take out a key, just knocked 3 soft taps and said, "You'll see." Then he stepped back and looked at me. I noticed that the door frame had been caulked all the way around, and there were no scrape marks near the handle, no signs of wear. It looked like a door on a stage set, built to suggest entry, but not made for opening. Tony didn't say anything else. He turned and walked back down the stairs, without looking behind him. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. Eventually, I left and drove to the conference like nothing had happened, but that afternoon the pacing started running through my head again. That back and forth motion, deliberate, and even like someone waiting for the right moment. I ended up calling the local sheriff's office that evening just to clear my conscience. A deputy named Harlan called me back and said he'd check into it. 2 days later, he left a message on my phone. He told me there had been an inspection of the sealed room, and it was just as Tony described, empty, stripped down to studs and subfloor, no signs of entry. But the message didn't end there. Harlan said they checked the security cameras from the parking lot. At 2:41 a.m., the footage showed someone walking up the exterior stairs and stopping at room 209, a woman in a dark shirt and jeans. She didn't knock. She didn't go inside. She just stood there, perfectly still, facing the door for 9 full minutes. Then she turned and walked back down the stairs. The problem, Harlan said, was that the tape ended there. The camera stopped recording, not glitched, not rewound, just stopped. They had no idea who the woman was, and Tony swore he hadn't seen anyone that night. Sometimes when I think back on it, I remember that cup of water I drank while standing in the bathroom. I remember how it tasted faintly metallic, like the water had been sitting still inside old pipes. I wonder what was on the other side of that wall. I wonder who she was waiting for and whether she ever found them. That story stuck with me, not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost didn't. A sealed room, a figure on the stairs, a pattern that plays out quietly while the world keeps moving past. Looking back at these stories, the empty highways, strange neighbors, the faces in windows, the silence where sound should be, I don't think they're about fear in the usual sense. They're about noticing something you weren't supposed to and not being able to forget it. The people in these stories weren't chasing answers. Most were just passing through, trying to sleep, trying to get home. But there's something about the in-between places, a roadside diner, a beach rental, a hallway at 2 a.m., that holds on to you. Maybe because no one looks too closely at them. Maybe because whatever waits there knows that. And maybe that's why we remember them. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you'd like to hear more stories like these, feel free to follow the channel. Share this with someone who listens at night and subscribe for more quiet dread. And tell me, have you ever been somewhere that felt like it noticed you even after you left?